Welcome back. The DA in KwaZulu-Natal has won a court bid to force the Electoral Commission of South Africa, that's the IEC, to verify addresses of more than 200 voters. That's after the party took the IEC to the Electoral Court because it did not believe the 235 people who were registered to vote in a by-election lived in the Umdoni ward in the province. For more on this, we can speak to DA KZN Chair, Dean McPherson. Dean, a very good afternoon to you. Good to have you on Newzroom Afrika. What was it about these voters that raised suspicion from the DA?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you. And this is a very marginal ward. The DA won it in the local government elections last year by a mere 37 votes. And there's only 900 people on the voters roll. So to have 235 people registered to vote immediately raised our suspicions, as that is almost a fifth of the voters roll registering in one single weekend. So the DA launched an initial internal investigation to try and verify some of these addresses. And we found that some of these people who claimed to live in the ward actually lived in the Eastern Cape and even neighboring municipalities. So the DA then engaged with the IEC through the structures and processes that the IEC prescribes to object to those voters. And the IEC completely ignored our objections at first, then tried to launch what we termed a desktop investigation, purely just to ascertain whether the address that they gave was in the ward, which of course it was. So we were forced with no other option but to approach the Electoral Court. And I think that the Electoral Court has made a potentially precedent finding that the IEC actually has a responsibility to verify voters' actual addresses and not just whether they live in the ward or not. So we're very pleased with the outcome, and we hope that the IEC will now finally do its job.
So what the IEC has basically been told to do by the Electoral Court is to verify the authenticity of these voters. No finding of wrongdoing yet. Is it the DA's position that there's no way at all that these 235 people were legitimate registered voters?
Well, first of all, let me just point out that the court issued an order within 24 hours after arguments were heard. And I think that speaks to the frivolous nature that they believed in the IEC's responses. We're still waiting for the full judgment, which may then have to go to the Constitutional Court for confirmation and ultimately lead to an amendment of the Electoral Act. But we won't get too far ahead of ourselves at this point. The truth of the matter is we just don't know the full status of these 235 voters. In our court papers, we made it clear that we had actually gone to verify 48 addresses and not one person who claimed to live there actually lived there. So that was about just roughly 20 or 25% of the total number of claimed registrations. So that's why we were insistent that the IEC had a duty to go and actually physically verify those addresses instead of just working out whether they lived in the ward or not based on the address that they gave. And we think that this is an important part of ensuring free and fair elections, particularly in by-elections and local elections, where the threat of busing is particularly high, and more so in marginal wards like this, where the DA has a slim 37-vote majority.
How prevalent or common would you say this sort of scenario is in the country? Of course, not confirmed fake votes as per the IEC that now has to verify, right, whether these are legitimate voters. But the suspicion that you had, how common is that in KZN specifically?
Well, we know the IFP had to drag the IEC to court in Matuba, where the exact same thing had happened there. And there have obviously been other instances across the province, but not to the point that it can materially change the democratic outcome of an election. Now, this case was important because 235 illegal registrations, potentially illegal registrations, let me say, when there's a 37-vote margin for the leading party, has every opportunity to change the outcome. Now, if people are allowed to simply register wherever they want in violation of the Electoral Act, well then, we might as well not have an Electoral Act to govern elections. But the Electoral Act is clear that you must be registered in the ward that you reside. And I think the judge has made a very important commentary, and I was watching the case, that actually if you have to RICA your phone and if you have to be able to verify your banking status through FICA, surely in a democracy and an election where voting is such a sacrosanct act, that you must be able to identify and be able to prove where you live. Now, of course, that's incredibly complex considering the living conditions of many people. But for the IEC simply to say, well, we'll take face value where people live, that is not, in our view, in the spirit of the Electoral Act and in line with the constitutional rights of voters to be able to participate in a free and fair election.
You've said that you're waiting for the full judgment, of course, so you can get a proper reading, but you've not ruled out other action, legal action, against the IEC potentially. Do you have any idea which way you could go legally with the IEC should you pursue more legal processes?
Well, the court has ordered the IEC to go and physically verify these 235 voters, including going door to door, and those are the orders of the court. So the IEC are not compelled to go and do this. Of course, we will then have to see what the outcome of that exercise will be. We will ensure that our party agents accompany the IEC to make sure that they do their job correctly. We will obviously have to see the outcome of that, and we'll go from there, and we'll wait the full order or the full judgments of the court before deciding on our next move. But the real tragedy, Thembekile, is that it should never have got this far. We should never have wasted the DA's resources and the IEC's resources, which are taxpayers' money, on asking them to do their job, which is to ensure free and fair elections. And I hope the IEC are going to have a long, hard look at their conduct, particularly in KZN, and the money that's been spent, and it will not be an insubstantial amount of money that they've spent, to defend what was very clearly before the judges in the Electoral Court, what is indefensible.
Dean McPherson, DA KZN chairperson, good to have your time. Thank you.
Thank you.